Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today, our very special guest is Alex Rodriguez. Alex is the Senior Manager of Learning and Development at Signature Solar. He's over there in Sulphur Springs, Texas, y'all. Hey, Alex, what's going on? Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yep, we're over here in Sulphur Springs, Texas, which is just east of Dallas. So you'll probably catch our accent pretty good.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah. Can you exaggerate your accent a little bit? Because I kind of like it. I'm just joking around, but so over there in Sulphur Springs, it must have been named Sulphur Springs because there's sulfur in the springs. It's kind of funny because where I live, we have a property and there's sulfur in the springs. It smells like rotten eggs.
I don't know if we necessarily have any springs or really even any sulfur around us too much. And the stink that comes from here is mostly from probably our cattle that we have on our property and things like that. We used to be the dairy capital of the world over here in Sulphur Springs, so I don't think we necessarily have anything that has to do with the name per se, but we definitely do get some
Okay,
stink from
well,
cattle.
I bet those cattles have some sulfur coming out of them, but
Sure does smell like it.
So some of that methane. So they say that methane is like actually from cows, cattle, and all that is kind of bad for climate change. It's like methane is much worse than carbon dioxide. Maybe it doesn't stay up there as long. So you guys got to figure out, what to do with those cows. Tell them to like hold it,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
definitely. We'll see how that goes, but I don't think they'll like that too much.
Yeah, that's just, it's just pretty much a different form of natural gas. I guess it's just a little bit more natural. So, one of the things that I like about Signature Solar, where you work, is that Signature rewards people for getting NABCEP certifications.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is what we call our STEP program. And so the S is to the power of two. So the Signature Solar Training and Education Program, it's a program that allows career growth opportunities within the solar industry. So we currently offer the PVA. You can get your PVTS, your PVDS, or your PVSI. So the design specialist, the technical sales, or the system inspector is what we currently offer. And so we offer the PVA and then a few board certs after that.
That's super cool. And then once you pass that, you get a raise, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to incentivize growth within the company and definitely growth within the solar industry. I'd say that's something that within L&D we're very passionate about, but also our owner James is passionate about. And we definitely like to follow our mission statement as close to the best as we can, especially with solar being for everyone or solar is for everyone. We definitely want to promote that not only to our customers, but to our team members as well within our company.
Yeah, you're kind of on both sides of it. You're training consumers, taking heat spring classes to get your NABCEP certifications and things like that. And then you are training providers. I guess you are a trainer yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a facilitator that handles a lot of our onboard training. We have an instructional designer on our team. We have two instructional designers on our team, and we have a coordinator on our team. So we don't just do as you said, we offer training to our customers, our consumers, but also to our team members as well, and that's through onboarding. So we also onboard our team members.
And you also mentioned you have two instructional designers. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so an instructional designer, basically their role is to take an idea or a need that, let's say I need to teach you how to basket weave, Sean. I would go to my instructional designer and say, hey, I need a course created on instructional design. So they would look at all the different things that it takes to basket weave and say, okay, well, we need to do this, we need to do this. They would look at the different modalities. So Sean, would you like to be taught in person how to basket weave, or would you like to be taught, through e-learning how to basket weave? They would create not only the content, but what we call storyboard the training and figure out, okay, well, we need to teach Sean this first before we can teach him this and this and this. So they develop the content and build out the courses.
Well, good thing I'm such a good basket weaver and I don't need to go through with all that, using palm fronds and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. And that sounds like you're pretty well organized. And I would also say that it sounds like a lot of what I do
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So one of the things too that I've noticed out there, just out on the wild internet and in Reddit and all that kind of stuff, There's a lot of DIY people using your products.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the products that we carry are DIY friendly. There's Victron for marine or mobile applications that can be used in off-grid situations as well. We carry GrowWad, we carry Tygo, we also carry the new LG batteries. EG4 carries a lot of DIY products. So I would say that with James, our owner, kind of starting out his career in solar being a DIYer, we try to cater to those consumers as much as possible. We also carry some products that are suited for installers and EPCs. But yeah, a lot of the products that we carry are DIY friendly.
And that's pretty cool. And I know that some people in the industry are like, oh, we should never have DIY solar because it's not safe and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at the old timers in the solar industry, going back to say the year 2000 and earlier, pretty much everything was DIY or, pretty much most of it was. And people just like reading Home Power magazine, the Real Good Solar Living source book, and, some of the first things, in fact, the very first things that I ever read that were technical about solar, and people just wiring up their old systems. And mostly it was people that didn't live near the grid. And I think one of the reasons, too, that I've seen that people like using signature solar products and especially batteries and things like that is that they're competitively priced.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely competitively priced. And I'd say something else that sets us apart is our technical support teams that we have and our sales teams, and especially the way that we try and carry ourselves, offering the STEP program and trying to be as educated as we can within the solar industry. Again, it's really a part of our core values in promoting that solar is for everyone. And a big thing that we also want to drive is solar and energy independence from the grid. So, yeah, I do see both sides of it, not so, the concerns of solar being DIY friendly, but also at the end of the day, I think that with the proper training and understanding the safety part of solar, it is probably one of the more DIY friendly renewable energy sources there are. I don't necessarily know if everybody should be going and playing around with nuclear energy, but hey, who am I to judge?
Oh, I have a DIY reactor right here that I'm working on. Boom. And if you just kind of had to guess, what percentage of people that are your customers or buying your products or like how much, revenue, all that kind of stuff, just if you just had to guess, is DIY versus regular installation companies that are pulling permits with licensed people? I'd imagine that's probably most of your customers is people with the licenses and the solar companies or
Yeah, I would say early on it was at a higher percentage than it is now with DIY customers. I really wouldn't be able to give too much of a ballpark estimate. I would say it's probably maybe a 50-50 split currently, but that's just me giving a guess. We've really tried to work with more installers and work with more EPCs to provide products to installers as well that want to provide solar power to some of their customers.
Huh, that's interesting. And so, one of the things that I think is super cool is that you have some stuff that's very unique. And the most unique thing that you have that I don't know where else you can get it, and I have one of them, is the mini split. So you've got a mini split, which is essentially it's a heat pump, which is an air conditioner that can work in reverse and make heat. So that means it's extra efficient and all that kind of stuff. And it has an input for a string of PV. I don't know anybody else that has anything like that. And I'm kind of obsessed with it just because I think it's really cool. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The mini splits or the heat pumps that we carry from EG4 are pretty unique on the market. There are other heat pumps, but the cool thing about the EG4 one that we carry is going to be the ability to connect a string of PV modules to them. And so I was actually installing an energy meter in my home panel the other day, and I had to turn off the panel, and the mini split kept running because it was pretty sunny out that day. So it can run completely off the grid without any AC power connected to it. So that was pretty interesting to see. My house didn't get too hot.
Yeah. And I'm wondering about that. Like, how does it work inside? I'm assuming that connected to the PV is like a DC to DC converter. And so you're bringing it to a DC bus. And also coming from the AC side, you have the frequency and the voltage of the grid. And it is also probably bringing it to DC, to that same DC bus, and then bringing it back out to a different frequency because with air conditioners and motors and compressors and things like that, there's going to be an optimal frequency when you turn it up and you turn it down that's not the frequency of the grid.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got a lot of interesting concepts, and once you start theorizing how everything should work, it's a pretty interesting piece of equipment. I remember on one of the podcasts that you did at Inner Solar with Ben Willett from
Yeah.
Signature.
Yeah, we were,
Um,
myself and Bill Brooks had them surrounded. We were trying
mhm.
to intimidate them. Just kidding, but
Correct,
we did really
correct.
well. Uh-huh.
But y'all had mentioned, what codes and regulations go around a piece of equipment like that. And, I think he had mentioned talking about the fuse sizing and just what kind of disconnects or what does rapid shutdown look like for a single string going to an inverter. And I told him, I was like, that's really interesting because me and one of my good friends and a colleague over at EG4 had discussed that. I was like, I'm curious what's going to happen in the NEC code because there's really no codes that really talk about something like this just yet. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I thought that was fairly interesting.
Yeah, and so rapid shutdown, if it's like if you're pretty much if you're going more than a single module,
Mhm.
you are going to need some sort of UL 3741 solution. And
Right.
that could be something that shuts it down between modules. There's plenty of devices that can do that. What do you see people doing as far as they putting it on the ground or getting something like a Tigo or a APS that shuts it down at the individual module level or other things?
Yeah, I do a roof mount and I just have Tyco optimizers on my panels on my roof. And I believe it's only 5 panels of the 300-watt Hyundais. But we've seen people do ground mounted systems as well. So it works across the board, but I prefer the roof mounted option for my home.
Uh-huh. Great, great. Then I was also wondering what would happen if I put more current on it? That was a question that I actually had for Outback for some guy in Alaska. And so I know some people that live in Haines, Alaska. It's where my brother lives, and I lived there for a while in this little place called Mud Bay. Shout out to Mud Bay. Woo! And in Mud Bay, there's a lot of people that are living in a rainforest under a canopy of trees with PV systems that are not getting much sunlight at all. I mean, they're getting less than 1 peak sun hour per day. They're not getting much in the way of direct sunlight and all that kind of stuff. And it's like they get by with what they can have, and they have some generators and stuff like that. But the PV, even underneath a tree, it makes something. It'll charge your phone or your computer, and they don't need to use a lot of electricity. They don't really have the opportunity to. But it would be nice for these people in places like that if they can put like extra strings. So I know with, say, like your average 5 kilowatt string inverter, as long as you keep the voltage right, you could put 1,000 strings on it, and you could have like 5 megawatts or a megawatt or whatever going to a 5 kilowatt inverter, and it will just clip the power and it'll work
Mhm.
really close to open circuit voltage. So I was wondering what would happen, and I asked Outback about that, and I was like, what would happen? Would it just clip the power? And to my surprise, the person at Outback was like, nope, you can't do that. That would make something break. And I was
Mhm.
almost suspicious, like, would it really? I didn't do a test yet or anything like that. And so, do you know what would happen if I did that with the DC to DC converter that you have on the mini split? If I put extra strings on it, would it just clip the power like it would with like the 5 kilowatt inverter example I was giving you?
That's a great question, and one that I haven't asked EG4 yet. So I really couldn't say for certain because I don't know if it's necessarily just a DC to DC combiner or if there's some kind of like MPPT logic in there that would flip that power. That's a great question.
Yeah, it just makes sense to me that it would have the power to do clipping. It just like there's this maximum
Mhm.
voltage and it just should not put out, too much power, more than the mini split can handle. And it would just bring it towards the open circuit voltage part of the IV curve to limit the current and therefore limit the power. So
Yeah, that's a great question. Officially not recommending anything to go out and try that, but that's something that we can absolutely ask EG4 and get their feedback on.
yeah, and if there's anybody listening too and has a good answer, even for something like the Outback of why it would break it instead of just, clipping the power, let's get on this podcast and talk about that. So some other things too that you have are these, batteries and battery inverters and stuff like that. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working on a training center and we need to have microgrids and things like that. And one of the way that I kind of want to do things is I want to use the real grid just to be able to charge batteries only, to only put the real grid as a battery charger. And so, when there's not enough sunlight or whatever, something like that, I don't want to backfeed the grid. I just want to have like my own little microgrid. Some people might call it a DC microgrid, but there's going to be AC coupling and DC coupling in it. So it would, in a way, be both. And that's good for training and all that kind of stuff. So, what would you suggest for something like that? And how many batteries? And it would be more like a training center. So we would be like moving things around and reconnecting them and hooking them up differently. So it wouldn't be as much of a permanent installation, although we'd want to make sure that it's safer than a permanent installation, which is one reason why I just didn't want to deal with backfeeding the grid or anything like that. So, what solution would you recommend for that? I know that you don't just have EG4 too, you have things like Victron and other brands.
Well, I guess one of my questions would probably be, is this going to be, is your microgrid going to operate off of 12240 single phase, or is it going to operate off of like 208 three-phase?
Yeah, 12240. Yep.
12240.
Yep.
The Victron system would be an excellent option. If you wanted to experiment with the multiple different components. So something that like EG4 has a lot of their components as like an all-in-one package, whereas Victron will have a lot of their components separately. So you have like your inverter, you'll have your MPPTs, you'll have like a smart shunt or something. So if you wanted to show those physical devices, I would always recommend Victron. We use Victron here in our training facility in an inverter when we're training new team members or new hires. So for a
Hmm.
training facility, I think Victron's an excellent option, and it's fairly easy to install as well when compared to some more larger systems. Are you looking for like a huge microgrid connection?
Well, I don't want it to be small, like cabin size. I want to be able to charge multiple electric vehicles at the same time. But I did like Victron. We did put Victron in my brother's cabin up in Alaska. And my friends in Germany, they drive around in vans. I actually just have like multiple independent friends that don't even know each other that drive around in vans in Europe. It's kind
Right.
of a thing there, I guess. And they worry just as much about their engine as they do about their stereo system. It's kind of funny. It's got the right kind of German techno music and that kind of stuff. But they have some like pretty, neat systems there and they're learning. They're in the industry, some of them. They're making their own batteries, which I know you're not supposed to on a house, but on a car is like different rules, and Germany has different rules, and they're pulling out the soldering irons. But the thing that they really liked about the Victron is they have the app on their phone, and these guys in their vans, they have like all these different things that they can coordinate with their Bluetooth. So it wouldn't be just, of course, it's
Mhm.
their music. I remember it was like some kind of like UV light shining on their water system to, purify the water,
Oh,
and
yeah.
their charge
Yeah.
controller, their battery voltage, their lithium ion battery voltage, and their car battery voltage and the currents and all that kind of stuff. And so I remember that Victron was pretty neat for that. And so my brother also, he might be in his cabin in Alaska right now looking at stuff on his Victron app. And another thing too that I noticed
Mhm.
was a little bit different with Victron is their tech support wasn't from Victron, it was from the distributors in the US. So I guess, is that how you do it too? So they're calling you, asking you what to set the voltage at and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we train our tech support teams on Victron products so they know the ins and outs of the system, but we support almost every product that we carry, at least to a basic level of troubleshooting.
Hmm.
I'm not sure exactly how Victron has their troubleshooting set up, but we do have some contacts that help our technical support team in the event that we need to go more in depth.
Yeah, I remember one of the things that we had sort of had problem with is up there, there's limited cell service. And if you're in there in the summer, there's a lot of cruise
Mhm.
ships. And as soon as the cruise ships are in the area, the cell service, it's the worst, because there's like all of a sudden like
Right.
10 times
Hmm.
more people than there are that live in the whole town just on one boat and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so we had to have like a cell phone booster and we had to call somebody and they were like, okay, go in here, put this number for this voltage and the float and all that kind of stuff. So we had to do all that kind of stuff. And then one of the things that I was thinking about too is when you mentioned Victron would be kind of good for that, is they do a lot of stuff that's for boats and cars and they call it shore power, when you have a
Hmm.
boat and you're out there sailing around and your PV and your motor and things like that, you're an island of power and you're, charging your own battery.
Hmm.
Then when you pull into the shore, you just plug it in. And the same as with an RV, they still call it shore power. I guess that comes from boats. And you can plug it in, and essentially it's a battery charger charging the battery separately from the sunlight and all that kind of stuff. So that would be a really good example of a way that you could just protect yourself from ever having even the slightest chance of backfeeding. It's like if you go plug in your RV or your boat, there's no way with a Victron system or something like that. It's impossible to backfeed. And people have been doing it for a long time.
Right.
Somebody could come to my house right now, plug into any plug in the house and with their RV, and there could be
Hmm.
solar on the RV charging the battery. And there could at the exact same time be battery charging going on from plugging into any outlet in my house.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I wonder if like any utilities ever get nervous about that because they're always so nervous about getting backfed. But it would be impossible to backfeed with that kind of equipment. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I think one of the cool things with the shore power connections with Victron, so let's say you wanted to run like 120, 240 for your boat or for your RV or whatever have you. With Victron, you can commission them in a way to have them have a floating leg or a floating neutral. I can't remember exactly what they call it. But essentially, you can connect to 120 volt shore power to power some of your 120 volt loads as well as charge your batteries, even though your system's operating in 120, 240,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
which I think is pretty interesting and pretty cool.
Yeah, there's different types of transformers. And so you can have an auto transformer. And one of the things that you can do with an auto transformer is to like isolate your neutral. And so you have the neutral coming from the grid. The grid goes down, you disconnect from the grid. What do you do? How do you make your neutral right in between, the two different 120s? And one way is using an auto transformer. Another way is to use two 120 volt inverters. And then another thing is for boats too, is when you go to a dock, talk about DIY. Like there's
Mhm.
all these boat people that don't know the first thing about electricity, and there's like, they get their neutral backwards and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And you can plug into your dock, and if the neighbor wired their boat wrong, your propeller can dissolve. And with boats, you have these things called sacrificial anodes. So there's like zincs that
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
put on your boats and things like that. And so another type of transformer that people will sometimes put on their boats, especially if you had a fancy boat, is an isolation transformer. So it's like a transformer that doesn't boost the voltage or drop the voltage. It just isolates you from the dock.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you have like your own voltage. Another thing that's kind of weird too is like in this water, and my boat's in salt water, you can have a different voltage from the front of your boat than the back of your boat, because there could be like
Really?
currents in the currents. Yep. Well, and you can also have that with like giant power projects, utility scale solar farms from one side to the other. They have to deal with what if the voltage is different from here to there, miles away and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely interesting. It seems like a whole different beat out on the water, especially with Victron. We had a few running jokes around here. It's like, okay, well, if we're in the water, how do we ground? Do we put our anchor out? Do we drive a grounding rod at the bottom of the sea? How do we ground our boat at this point?
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, it's definitely a whole different beast. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, when I was earlier in my learning of solar and stuff like that, I was living on a boat and I had this book about everything about boats. And I was,
Okay.
studying a lot about like the
Mhm.
electrical systems and grounding and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things about grounding and why it's usually like the most argued about
Mhm.
subject in the National
Mhm.
Electrical Code. And it's like there's just a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And there's a whole bunch of different
Right.
situations. You can be in Florida, the lightning capital of the world, with moist ground,
Mhm.
and you're going to be doing grounding and bonding differently than if you were, say, in Arizona, where it barely ever rains, where the earth doesn't conduct electricity, or where I am, where
Right.
it's like I couldn't tell you how many years it's been since I've seen lightning, you know. And then there's also the difference between grounding and bonding. So let's just, and everybody says grounding when they mean
Mhm.
bonding. In fact, even in the National Electrical Code, they do too.
Mhm.
So grounding just means connecting to earth. Bonding is connecting things together. So you don't want to be touching two different solar modules and have one of them be at a different voltage than the other one, the frame of the module. So say there's a loose wire behind a module and it's touching one frame and not the other. And if they're not bonded together and they're not at the same voltage, and you touch both of them with two different hands, then that current goes through your heart,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and probably 9 times out of 10, it makes you worse off. And 1 time out of 10, hey, who knows? It turns you into the Hulk or Spider-Man or something like that. Just kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, grounding is definitely an interesting topic.
Mm.
So I feel like, you go to one forum that talks about one thing and there's 10 people that disagree there, and then you go to another forum that talks about the same thing and 10 people disagree there, and everybody's got different ideas, and it's a very interesting topic and a rabbit hole to go down for sure.
Oh, yeah. You can even grab like the two most respected books on bonding and grounding. Like you can grab a
Mhm.
book from Mike Holt and from Soares, and they will be different from each other.
Right,
Yeah, on how to do things. And
exactly.
yeah, and one of the things that I like to do with my training is to not pick sides. Like I'll just give you both sides and let people understand that there's two different ways of looking at something.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually learned and got my PD system inspector board certificate through watching your videos on heat springs. So
Oh, thanks.
very cool.
Well, congratulations,
Thank
Inspector.
you.
So I was also thinking too, you have like different brands, and I know when I go by the Signature Solar booth at the different solar conferences, I usually seen lots of EG4 stuff, but you also have Victron. Maybe you could mention some other brands?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's Growatt. We also have
Grow.
Solus. So Growatt, we have our high voltage hybrid inverters, or can be
Mm-hmm.
used as grid tied inverters. We also carry Solus, which is also a high voltage hybrid inverter. Something cool with Solus, we carry some of their C&I products, which are commercial and industrial systems. And so I think one of the largest Solus products we carry, I think, is right around 60 kilowatts, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that is at 483 phase. So it's a
Oh,
it's a
great.
pretty hefty system for some projects.
And then you called it a hybrid inverter, so it takes batteries and PV, I guess.
Right, sorry. So we carry two lines of Solus, which we carry C&I, which is commercial and industrial, and we also carry what they call Resi or residential inverters, which are their 11.4 kilowatt inverter. That is a high voltage hybrid inverter that we carry.
Oh, so the residential one is the hybrid.
Right, right. Yep, the C&I products are strictly just string inverters.
Okay,
We also just, well, we've onboarded the LG high voltage batteries. So that's what we'll be coupling with our Growatt and Solus hybrid residential system. So I've actually been working with Kelly, who does all of our videos here,
great,
to help her build out a Growatt and LG system for an upcoming video that she's shooting. So it's pretty interesting.
great. Shout out to Kelly there. And then maybe tell us about like, so you're in Sulphur Springs, Texas,
Right.
and you have a bunch of equipment set up there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I wish I could move my camera around and show you, but we have a facility in here that we actually use to have testing equipment on. So we have a lockout tagout system. We have a system where we can operate safely. So our new hires or any team members that come in can actually look at the system and see it operate live without just guessing how the system will operate. So we do have live equipment in our facilities here. And we also offer some external training classes as well, which are for any DIY customer who's interested in installing equipment. There are some classes that we offer to learn how to install the equipment if they're interested in before purchasing. So it's pretty interesting.
Great. Okay. Where are you seeing a lot of the DIY stuff? Like, are you seeing it in like different regions of the country more than others? Are you seeing people putting it on houses that are connected to the grid?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that most of our DIY installs, well, if I would have to give a ballpark estimate, I'd say most of our DIY installs aren't necessarily going to be connected to the grid. Maybe it's in a cabin somewhere or just completely running in an off-grid scenario. But we do have customers that work with installers to install a grid-tied system or a multi-mode hybrid system to their house.
Yeah, like I know somebody that just did a DIY project, just a friend of mine, a
Mhm.
neighbor, and he was connected to the grid and he disconnected from the grid.
Oh.
and he still had a way to plug back in if it was a dark
Mhm.
day or something like that.
Mhm.
But, kind of cool. Huh.
Yeah, I will say it depends on the area, the AHJs and the regulations. With any system that interacts with the grid or sells back has to be UL 1741 listed. It has to go through all the permitting processes and it has to have a system design. I will say we have worked with some DIYers that are just solely looking for battery backup for a critical loads panel. Maybe they want to
Mhm.
keep their refrigerator, some lights running, and maybe an outlet or two for their microwave. And so with the proper permitting, they have installed a system all on their own just to provide battery backup to some of their critical loads.
Do you ever run into crazy DIYers, like people that just seem completely nuts and are ready for the apocalypse and they're doing crazy stuff?
There have been quite a few interesting projects to see. And to be honest, there are some on the installer side, the EPC side as well. I think there was one installer that I had the opportunity to meet, and I believe that they were installing up to 10 inverters and well over 20 batteries for a farmhouse that they were working on. So some of these projects do get fairly interesting. I can't really say if anyone's been crazier than the other,
Uh-huh.
more so just unique to see implemented.
So like 10 inverters, so about how many kilowatt hours of batteries?
I want to say it was getting close to the 60 or 80 kilowatt hour mark, if I remember correctly, but I may be wrong there.
Did they put them all in the same place in a barn or?
I don't really know too many details of the install. I just happened to talk to them
Mhm.
and just get to hear about the system size that they were using. So I never really got to see anything actually installed,
Okay,
unfortunately.
great. I just wanted to make sure they weren't violating the International Residential Code, but you did say it was a farmhouse, so maybe it would be the International Fire Code if it's not for residential. So then you could put bigger
Right.
batteries and all that kind of stuff. But also, Texas does things a little bit differently, and you have different versions of the code adopted all
Right.
throughout Texas. So that's why Texas is sort of like a country, and because you have all these different states within it,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting here in Texas because Houston may have different codes than what we have, or close to Dallas and Tyler or Longview. It's interesting here in Texas how many different AHJs adopt different rules and have different rules for their installs.
Yeah, I think you might be on like 2008, 2011, 2014, 2017, 2020, and 2023 NEC or something crazy like that. I'm not
Yeah,
exactly sure.
absolutely.
Uh-huh. And so then I wonder if you could have like a house that's in between two jurisdictions, and then half your house is on one version of the code, the other half is on the other, and then that could help you design the house. It's probably pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting, working and talking with, especially our design team, because they'll design the systems for our customers, and it's interesting hearing just how differing the rules and regulations are from the east side of Texas all the way to the west side of Texas. It's interesting just how many times the code changes for the same install, it seems like.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I remember one time they did a RE Plus, they used to call it SPI, and it was in
Okay.
Texas. And people were like riding the bull and stuff like that. I
Mhm.
can't remember, was it in Dallas or Houston? There's Gillies. I guess it was Dallas. I think they did it at Gillies, which is where,
Mhm.
what was it? It was like some kind of John Travolta movie was there back in the 70s. I don't know,
Oh,
something like that.
mhm.
But it was,
That's interesting.
yeah, it was kind of fun. And then there's like all these solar people getting knocked off the bull. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
Let's see, the NABCEP conference is coming up, correct? The 24th through the 27th, right?
Yeah, the NAPCEP conference from when we're recording is just right around the corner. I'm getting ready to go there. I just interviewed the president and CEO of NAPCEP, Sean O'Brien, and we released that one right away, but we do have a queue. And so this podcast will probably be getting edited during the conference. and it'll be on the queue. But yeah, I'm getting really excited about going to there. They're having an Alice in Wonderland theme. It's going to be in Reno, Nevada. The year before it was in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I am doing the NABCEP PV associate class there, and I've done it for a number of times now at the NABCEP conference. It's always a lot of fun. For people listening, if they want to go to a NABCEP conference, the next one that they're going to have to go to is going to be mid-March, and it's going to be over in Milwaukee. And that's going to be of 2026. So get out your 2026 calendar and time to start planning things. Whenever I find out when a conference is going to be, because I usually go to most of them, I get on my calendar, I get on the airplane website, I get on the hotel website, and I try to plan as far ahead as I can because it's kind of crazy with conferences how much more the hotel will be. Just like the same exact hotel, like sometimes I could notice that I did something wrong. So I'm going to go to SNEC, the big conference in Shanghai, and I made a reservation for the hotel. And it was like, wow, that's such a great deal. And it's because they moved the conference. They moved it from one
Oh,
giant place to another giant place.
oh
So
wow.
it was, when they changed the venue, that's how I knew they changed the venue because it's like, there's no rooms for $100 right on site at the conference. I mean, that just is not going to exist anywhere in the
Right.
world. And then another one that's kind of hard too is there's the COP conference. That was the craziest hotel experience I had. So COP, Conference of Parties, Paris Agreement, all that kind of stuff. So I think it was COP 27 that I went to in Egypt, and it was impossible to get a hotel room. And the way that I ended up getting a hotel room is with points. So
Mhm.
I have all these, points for the hotel group that I belong to, and that
Right.
worked. And I ended up staying at a hotel that was almost vacant except for a bunch of press people, which is also weird. So it was like they decided, I guess it was the government decided to, limit the amount of people that could come. And they
Mhm.
were really kind of paranoid. I mean, you know that there's been like political unrest in Egypt and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so they had Arab Spring, and then they had a new government, and then the old government, like the military, ended up taking over. And I think it's like now that government, or what is it, or Muslim Brotherhood or something like that. But anyway, it's more of like ruled by one guy, where like I don't think it's very democratic. And another thing that was like creepy weird at that conference was there was guys that looked like, your typical spot CIA guy with like wearing a black jacket with a black tie
Mhm.
with a little thing in their
Mhm.
ear. I think I figured out it was like every 500 meters, they were standing there in the middle of the desert in a super hot day
Wow.
wearing a dark suit.
Wow.
And just like, what's the point? And they worry about protesters. And so
Mhm.
the only place they had some kind of like concessions to have a free speech zone, and it was inside, I think they call it the blue zone, and that's where you need like special permission to go in, and it's hard to get in the blue zone. And then there was like some protests going on in there. And it was also weird too, because it's supposed to be a climate conference and it's in an oil country. And there's all these like oil people there, like tons
Wow.
of, it was like managed by somebody that, like some country
Mhm.
guy.
Mhm.
I think even the last one too, it was in the UAE, I think. And it was managed by like the head of the petroleum industry or something. It just seems like kind of sold out. And I don't think it's bad to have the climate conference, even though the oil people are kind of taking it over. We just need to take it back. And at least
Mhm.
it's a forum for people to talk. And if they're
Right.
saying the wrong things, at least like the press could be in there saying the right things. I remember I saw the KPFA reporter, Amy Goodman, and she's like super against oil companies, you could say, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
she was reporting from there and all that kind of stuff. But it was pretty interesting. And then I got to see the pyramids and King Tut, and, all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of fun. This year, going to be in Brazil.
Did you get to go into the pyramids? Did you get to take a tour of the pyramids?
Yeah, I sort of went inside of one, I guess. Yeah, I sort of went inside of one. I think it was the really, really old one too. And then I saw the Great Pyramids and all that kind of stuff. I did a really quick tour. So I
Right.
just like went for all the extras because I was only touring pyramids for a day. So I like, yeah, this was also weird too. As soon as I got off the plane, there's all these people for the climate conference, like getting off the plane, and some
Mhm.
guy inside the airport, I almost thought like he was inside of security with like credentials and name tags, and it was before you leave the airport. Sometimes these international places, you get out of the airport and there's
Mhm.
these people trying to hustle you. Well, he was inside of the security area. So I was like, okay, I'll give this guy a chance. And then he introduced me to some other guy, and I paid my visa fee really quick. I got to the front of every line. I didn't even have to go through security. He just waved me past it. He introduced me to some guy in a car. The guy in the car picked me up the next morning, and I had like, I think at one time I had five guys working for me at the same time, as my tour guides. And there's like one guy with the camels and the other, like
Mhm.
there's all these different people, like, and I don't like traveling to like touristy places where there people are really aggressive, but I had to see the pyramids, but it was definitely like that, like super aggressive touristy place where if you're walking
Oh,
by yourself, you can't say no thank you fast enough.
right. Right. That's interesting.
But it was pretty interesting. And the next climate COP conference is going to be in Brazil. And I've been trying to register NorCal Solar, the nonprofit organization that
Mhm.
I'm president of right now. And it's a 51-year-old organization. And so that's pretty cool. And I think right now I've been going through the application process for 3 years. You know, they keep delaying it. They're like, oh, we got to delay it for another year, another year. And so I'm just like, but don't worry, you're still on the list. And it's like, too bad I don't have an oil well. I'd get in really quick, I think.
You think so? You think that would speed up the process?
Yeah, you're in Texas. Do you have an oil well I could borrow?
I think all of ours are currently used up right now, but if I run across any, I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll put up an ad or something like that. Speaking of free speech and all that kind of stuff and protesting, I saw something yesterday that I just thought was really funny that I'll mention is like I'm in Lafayette, California, and there's like this sort of like a town square or something on the side of the road, and I'm driving my car. I look over and it says, protest here every Tuesday. And the thing that I liked most about it, it didn't say what they were protesting about. Like I thought that was so cool and so American. Like I think it's great to have the ability to protest. And no
Yeah,
matter what they're protesting about, that's cool.
that's an interesting sign though, for sure. That's interesting.
I'm trying to think of like some generic protest signs like stop something, you know, just hold up a sign, stop something.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Or hold up a sign that says free speech or things like that. It's like I think
Mhm.
it's really good. Like I love living in a country where like I've been to Washington D.C. and done classes there a whole bunch of times, and I love living in a country where you can go right by the White House and there's pretty much a 24/7 protest going on there, and it doesn't matter who's president or anything else, there's a
Uh,
24/7 protest going over at the White House. So that's free speech.
yeah.
And if you try doing that somewhere else, like there goes your head, you know.
I don't think I've ever been that far north and that far east at the same time. I think the furthest I've gone is east is probably Florida here in the States.
Is where was that?
The furthest I've gone east from Texas is probably Florida, and the furthest north I've probably gone from Texas is Colorado.
Oh, okay. Well, I love both of those places. Getting ready to go to the Colorado ACES conference, American Solar Energy Society conference in August. And so that's always a lot of fun going over there in Boulder.
Oh, it's over in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, and so Boulder, pretty much you fly into Denver, and then Boulder's a little, I don't know, half hour to an hour away, something like that. And it's at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and it's just the most beautiful university, and you're surrounded by Rocky Mountains, and even in the summer, even in August, you probably might see some snow, or I guess it would be glaciers. I don't know, it's a beautiful place and that I love going over there to Boulder and it's a higher altitude and the Denver and then they do a tour of NREL, National Renewable Energy Labs. So that's
Okay.
a really cool thing to see over there in Boulder too.
Right.
And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Or when
awesome.
you're in Boulder, I should say National Renewable Energy Labs is in Golden, Colorado.
Oh,
And all
okay.
these places, just like Denver, all those places, it's kind of like in the same big valley at the foot of the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you mentioned Florida too. It's like I've done some work in Florida, but I haven't in a while. And I lived in Florida for I think about a couple of months one time, which was pretty neat. And I was in South Palm Beach, went down to the Florida Keys a few times. It was really cool. I liked it. It's very low elevation, so people are worried that it might be underwater if we don't keep doing what we're doing. But they have the Florida Solar Energy Centers there. I was on Mike Holt's video in Florida, but I know he's moved. But
Yeah.
and so there's lots of stuff in Florida, and I have family there. So
Yeah, that's awesome. We travel to Florida. We try to every summer for some kind of vacation on the Gulf of Mexico side of the peninsula, I guess, for Florida.
like Tampa or Fort Myers or something like that.
Yes, actually, just right on the edge of Florida and Alabama, Pensacola. We go up there
Pensacola up there on the Panhandle.
sometimes.
Yeah, and then that's like you go from there to that little piece of Alabama that hits the coast, and then
Yep.
Mississippi, that little piece of Mississippi that hits the coast. I've done some classes there for the Navy Seabees in Gulfport,
Wow.
Mississippi. That was pretty
Right.
cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Me and our facilitator here, Cody, we actually just got back from Orlando doing a conference with Training Magazine. They hold conferences for training and education within,
Oh, cool.
not necessarily for the solar industry, but as a whole industry is learning and development. So,
Oh,
yeah,
great.
Orlando was pretty neat.
Awesome. I got to check that out. Training conference. Okay. So let's see. So is there any other stuff that we should be covering right now? Any good talking points?
I don't know if I necessarily have any other talking points. I think we covered just about everything that I was thinking of.
Mhm. So what are you working on for training over there? What's your latest projects?
Not to go into too much detail, but we are looking to incorporate some more e-learning videos for our team members and for our customers on commissioning systems, commissioning inverters and systems that we carry. So some more e-learning content.
Okay, that sounds very cool and very important. So yeah, so to all of our listeners, if you're doing some DIY projects or installing solar and need to learn how to do it, you can learn it all from Alex Rodriguez over there at Signature Solar. And you can also take some of my classes over there at HeatSpring. You can find me at solarsean.com and you can find out everything that there is to know about solar and storage. So we'll see you next time. Woo!